In Hollywood in the 1950s, the Western genre was more popular than ever. John Wayne was, of course, the ultimate icon and star of Westerns. I was in my early teens. My dad, who was a huge John Wayne fan, introduced me to this whole new world of Westerns. Of all the Westerns that stood out to me, it was Rio Bravo. What stood out to me mostly were the characters. The tough sheriff, the alcoholic deputy, the young rookie, and the funny sidekick, and the one beautiful woman who always, constantly, keeps the sheriff on his toes. Rio Bravo is a 1959 American Western film produced and directed by Howard Hawks, and starring John Wayne, Dean Martin, Ricky Nelson, Angie Dickinson, Walter Brennan, and Ward Bond. Written by Jules Furfman and Lee Brackett, based on the short story Rio Bravo by B.H. McCampbell. Rio Bravo is the story of Sheriff John T. Chance of the town of Rio Bravo in Texas, who arrests a brother of a powerful rancher with the help of his alcoholic deputy, Dude, and his crippled sidekick, Stumpy, and a young gunslinger called Colorado Ryan must fend off the rancher and his gang from getting their man out of jail. During this time, John T. Chance develops an awkward relationship with a mysterious woman nicknamed Feathers. After the critical and box office failure of Land of the Pharaohs 1955, Hawks took a break from directing and lived in Europe. It was during this period that he saw how popular Western television shows had become and realized that audiences cared more about the characters than the plots to the shows. This is where the idea for this movie started to form. Rio Bravo was Howard Hawks' first movie after a 4-year hiatus. Rather than making a movie that centered around one main plot, he wanted to make a completely character-driven Western, with several storylines running through it simultaneously. The studio bosses refused but instantly changed their minds when Hawks told them he was casting John Wayne as the lead. John Wayne regarded this film as marking his transition into middle age. At 51, Wayne was starting to get overweight, and he believed he was too old to play the romantic lead anymore. His last 4 films, since The Searchers in 1956, had been unsuccessful, and he felt the only way to keep audiences coming was to revert to playing John Wayne in every film.
And all of a sudden you're working with, at that time, the biggest star in motion pictures, the Duke, John Wayne.
Well, it was,
what's the word I'm looking for when you go into a situation and you're...
Well, aren't you awed?
Or overwhelmed by it, yeah, or intimidated.
I was intimidated, and I was thrilled to death. I mean, the thrill, took care of that. It isn't as though I was ambivalent. So I got used to the thrill, and it was intimidating to work with Hawks more than Duke.
Actors who were considered for the role of Dude were James Cagney, Rod Steiger, Richard Widmark, Tony Curtis, Cary Grant, Henry Fonda, Glenn Ford, William Holden, Spencer Tracy, and Robert Mitchum. Howard Hawks negotiated for Frank Sinatra to co-star as Dude. Hawks then decided on crooner Dean Martin, who seemed an unlikely choice for the role. Montgomery Clift, who was bisexual and a liberal Democrat, turned down the role of Dude because he didn't want to work again with John Wayne and Walter Brennan, who were both strongly conservative Republicans. They had previously worked together in Red River in 1948. Clift suggested the Young Lions co-star Dean Martin for the role of Dude. Dean Martin's agent approached Howard Hawks to consider his client for the role of the drunken deputy, Dude. Hawks agreed to meet with Martin at 9:30 the next morning. When Hawks learnt that Martin had done a show in Las Vegas until midnight and hired a plane to fly him to the meeting, Hawks was so impressed that he simply sent Martin to get a costume and told him he had the part.
Dean Martin was so eager to do Rio Bravo, play a drunk. I said, go out and get into the kind of an outfit you think you ought to have on. He came back looking kind of pretty and like a gunman and everything. And I said, that isn't like drunks that I know. Most of them have tattered shirts. Mostly they're in underwear. They've got the oldest hat in the world. Okay, he said, just, will you be here 2 hours more? And I said, yes, and he came back and he was the way he was in the picture.
When he was cast as Dude, an alcoholic battling inner demons, Dean Martin turned to his friend Marlon Brando for advice about playing the role. Jane Greer, Julie London, Beverly Garland, Carolyn Jones, Piper Laurie, Janice Page, and Donna Reed were considered for the female lead, Feathers. Angie Dickinson was cast after Howard Hawks saw her in an episode of Perry Mason.
It's her first big film. First film, as a matter of fact. Wasn't it?
First big film.
Yeah.
Now, I had done a couple of others before it. I had to have some grounds for being able to work with that wonderful giant, John Wayne, and Howard Hawks, a giant of a director.
You bet.
And it was only wonderful, Dave. Duke loved playing chess. It was very hot. We shot it in Tucson. And whenever we could escape to an air-conditioned area, he would play chess.
Originally, Howard Hawks did not want to cast Ricky Nelson, whom he considered to be both too young and too lightweight, and deliberately gave him the fewest possible number of lines for a third billed star. However, he later admitted that having Nelson's name on the poster had probably added $2 million to the film's box office performance. Actors who were considered for the part of Colorado Ryan were Tony Curtis, Robert Mitchum, Lloyd Bridges, Jack Lemmon, Lee Marvin, Jack Palance, James Garner, Rod Taylor, and Michael Landon. Howard Hawks always wanted someone who would connect with teenagers to play Colorado. Reportedly, his first choice was Elvis Presley, who was enthusiastic about the opportunity. Unfortunately, Presley's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, wanted too much money and top billing. Neither Hawks nor John Wayne would have any of it.
And Rick Nelson was about 19, and he was nervous on the set. And I said, but you know, you face thousands of people in a concert. He said, I'm totally at ease there.
Yeah.
Here I'm nervous.
Yeah.
He was a sweetheart.
The original title of the screenplay was The Bull by the Tail, which is a line of dialogue that Pat says to Chance in the movie. Actors William Demarest, Buddy Ebsen, Bill Ives, Lee Marvin, and George Gabby Hayes were considered for the role of Stumpy.
One of Hawks' favorite character actors was Walter Brennan.
He'd been doing a very kindly old man in a television series. And the first scene we did, he started in doing the same character, and I stopped the cameras and stopped everything and said, I don't want any of that junk that you've been doing on television. I want a cantankerous... I forgot, he said. Okay, start him again, and he went right off into a completely different character.
Filming took place in the summer of 1958, and the movie's credits gave 1958 as the year of production, although the film was not released until 1959 in Technicolor. Exteriors for the film were shot at Old Tucson Studios. Other films filmed on that old set were Gunfight at the OK Corral in 1957. The sets in Old Tucson were built to 7/8 scale, so the performers look larger than life. On May the 8th, 1958, just 1 week into shooting, Ricky Nelson celebrated his 18th birthday. As a gift, John Wayne and Dean Martin gave him a 300-pound sack of steer manure, which they then threw Nelson into as a rite of passage. Rio Bravo was Ward Bond's final feature film. Ward Bond's death scene was filmed from a distance because it was actually a double. Bond had already left the set to be back on location for Wagon Train. Rio Bravo was John Wayne and Ward Bond's 22nd and final movie together. Ward Bond was one of John Wayne's best friends in real life. Apparently, Walter Brennan's gimpy leg routine was working for him, because he was using it in The Real McCoys. which was on television at the same time he was filming Rio Bravo. Rio Bravo was the last movie in which John Wayne wore the hat he had worn since Stagecoach in 1939. Filming outdoors was often a chore to shoot due to the 120-degree heat and the invasion of grasshoppers that fried on the hot lights and littered the sets. Although character actor Harry Carey Jr. was listed in the credits on screen, he does not appear in the picture. Carey had a drinking problem at the time. He called director Howard Hawks Howard instead of Mr. Hawks on one of his first days on the set, infuriating Hawks. His contract, including his pay and his screen credit, was honoured, but his part, a townsman, was cut. Howard Hawks considered this his most personal movie. Rio Bravo is regarded as one of Hawks' best, and is notable for its long opening scene, which contains no dialogue. The film received favourable reviews and was successful, taking in over $5.5 million. The film was a huge success in Italy, laying the groundwork for the following decade's spaghetti western boom. Although it was a 1959 release, the opening credits say 1958. In an interview with Walter Brennan, he stated that for years after this film was released, people who met him for the first time expected him to limp, like Stumpy. He said he considered it a tribute to his acting. Actor Claude Akins recalled that during filming, all the actors found themselves starting to talk like John Wayne. Wayne was not impressed by this. The musical score was composed by Dmitri Tomkin. The film starred a crooner, Dean Martin, and a teen idol, Ricky Nelson. Howard Hawks included 3 songs in the soundtrack before the big showdown. In the jailhouse, Martin sings My Rifle, My Pony, and Me, accompanied by Ricky Nelson, after which Nelson sings a brief version of Get Along Home, Cindy, accompanied by Dean Martin and Walter Brennan. Over the closing credits, Martin, backed by the Nelson Riddell Orchestra, sings a specially composed song, Rio Bravo, written by Tomkin. Nelson later paid homage to both the film and his character by including the song Restless Kid on his 1959 LP Ricky Sings Again. Rio Bravo was made as a response to the 1952 film High Noon, which is sometimes thought to be about blacklisting in Hollywood, as well as a critique of McCarthyism. Wayne would later call High Noon un-American and say he did not regret helping run the writer Carl Foreman out of the country. Director Howard Hawks went on the record to criticize High Noon by saying, I didn't think a good sheriff was going to go running around town like a chicken with his head cut off, asking for help, and finally his Quaker wife had to save him. John Wayne was nervous about the love scenes between Chance and Feathers since he was 51 and Angie Dickinson was only 26. Footage from this film was incorporated into flashbacks in John Wayne's last film, The Shootist, in 1976, depicting him as a younger man. Howard Hawks made 2 very distinct remakes with 2 loose variations of Rio Bravo. Both of these remakes starred John Wayne, and both scripts were written by the same writer of Rio Bravo, Lee Brackett. These 2 films were El Dorado. Rio Lobo in 1970 was probably the most distant version from Rio Bravo. Director John Carpenter was heavily influenced by Howard Hawks and made Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976, which was his tribute to Rio Bravo. He also paid homage to the original film by using the pseudonym John T. Chance, the name of Wayne's character, for his editing credit. Quentin Tarantino was also heavily influenced by Rio Bravo, and he said that before he enters into a relationship with a girl, he always shows her Rio Bravo, and if she doesn't like it, there is no relationship. Rio Bravo is one of those true gems as far as westerns go. John Wayne has made well over 100 films, but this was one of his best films, alongside such classics as The Searchers and The Quiet Man. Dean Martin gives an incredible performance as the alcoholic deputy Dude, and there are some amazing moments. He even gets to sing in this one. Rio Bravo is a hangout film in every sense. The story is very simply laid out. Nothing is ever overstated. There is action, but the main reason this film works is the chemistry of all the actors.
I don't want to analyze it too much because I've seen too many people that are kind of ruined. I used to play tennis with the world's champion tennis player, and he could hit the ball harder than anybody man I knew until he wrote a book about his serve. From that time on, he couldn't serve. Any woman could return his serve. And it's very dangerous to stop and think of so many things. Just one question. Do you like it or don't you? And if I don't like a scene, I stay there until I do like it.
They just work so well together, and this film is just so much fun to watch. This film had a quality to it not found in many films today. Sadly, there aren't many westerns made today. It's a dying genre. If you have not seen this film, I highly recommend you watch it. My name's JonnyBaak. Thanks for watching.